Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. 20 years ago, the West started the war on terror to remove the world of terrorism, to establish human rights, and to create a better world. 20 years later, is the world a better place? Let's take a look. 20 years ago, after the attack on the Twin Towers, America and the West launched the war on terror on the Muslim world. Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan are just some of the countries targeted by the war on terror. The Western nations began the war on terror with a military campaign, sending in armies, invading lands, sending in drones, bombarding cities and civilians. Their aim was regime change and to rebuild the nations in their image. But it wasn't long before the real nature of the war on terror became apparent to the Muslims and to the non-Muslims. The campaign hid behind the word terrorism, but its real aim and motivation was to re-engineer Islam globally. Tony Blair called Islam an evil ideology. Geert Wilders referred to the Quran as an inspiration and a justification for violence around the world. The British conservative political commentator Douglas Murray said the problem with terrorism was because of Islam, and Britain needed less Islam. The American Sam Harris said there is a direct link between Islam and Muslim terrorism. Ayaan Hirsi Ali said that violence is inherent in Islam. Boris Johnson mocked Muslim women, calling them letterboxes. Donald Trump said we have a problem in this country, and that is called Muslims. These are just a few of many quotes by prominent people in the West legitimizing the abuse of Muslims and Islam. And it's these comments that set the mood music to which political policies were hatched to address Muslims and Islam globally. And because of this, Muslims in the Muslim world face drone attacks, invasions, torture, humiliation, and Muslims being illegally rendered to foreign nations to be tortured and killed and imprisoned. Even foreign aid and NGOs were part of the artillery used by the war on terror to put pressure on the Muslims and the Muslim world. The theatre of the war on terror opened its doors in the Muslim world, but it also came to the streets and cities of the West in the form of campaigns to redefine Islam. Over the last 20 years, Muslims have seen a tsunami of attacks against their belief and practices. The concept of Khilafah, Sharia law, the dress of women, even halal food hasn't been spared in this attack. For Muslims to speak out against the war on terror and the illegal wars and occupation and the illegal torture camps, even this became criminalized. These policies created a culture of spying and sowed a deep distrust between Muslims and non-Muslims, creating an atmosphere where it became possible for people to openly attack Muslims and attack places of worship and attack their beliefs and practices. The war on terror was waged in vengeance, but it soon morphed into a crusade to proselytize secular liberal values to the Muslim world, which needed saving from its evil religion, according to them, and using this justification to retrospectively legalize the crimes that they were committing. So let's not be fooled. There was no morality about this war on terror. Let's not forget the sodomy committed by American soldiers in Fallujah, the torture and rendition of innocent civilians to secret black sites around the world to be tortured and killed, the gang rape and murder of a 14-year-old girl in Iraq by the name of Abreen Qasim Hamza al-Janabi, and the murder of her family by US soldiers in March 2006. And let's not forget about the abduction of the Honourable Sister Afia Siddiqui, the abduction of the Honourable Naveed Butt, and also let's not forget the abduction and the torture and the re-imprisonment of our Honourable brother Muazzam Beg. And let's not forget the contracts Britain received for rebuilding Iraq, that Iraq they themselves destroyed and bombed into the Stone Age. There's no morality about any of this. The war of terror began with ending the rule of the Taliban, and it has ended 20 years later with the Taliban back in power. Not only did they fail to defeat the Taliban, who had no air force, no navy, no standing army and no heavy artillery, they even failed to convince the Muslims to leave their way of life for the secular liberal values that they tried to impose on them. After the spending of countless trillion dollars, killing almost 1 million Muslims in the Muslim world, making many more millions homeless and refugees around the world, maiming people for life. After all this, it has ended in abject failure for the Western forces. And not only that, this war on terror has resulted in fractures in Western nations. America, Britain and European nations are deeply divided on race, religion and politics like never before. And after 20 years, the West is no longer, or America is no longer as powerful as it thought it was in 2001. So after 20 years, yes, the Muslim world may still be ruled by despotic rulers. And yes, the global attack on Islam hasn't stopped. The media is still demonizing Muslims, Muslim women, Quran, Sharia, Jihad, and yes, even halal food. And there may still not be any security for Muslims in the Muslim world, let alone the minorities. The IMF and capitalist institutions still have a stranglehold on the economies in the Muslim world. But something has indeed changed. Who would have thought 20 years ago, despite America's huge economic power and military might, they would have been publicly humiliated by the Taliban like this? The greatest lesson for the Muslims is that there is a greater power above the Americans, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The myth peddled by the puppet rulers and their preachers that the Muslim world is too weak, that the enemies are too strong, and we cannot remove the occupation of Palestine, and we cannot do anything to oppose the West. This goose has been well and truly cooked. Not only have their pretense and lies been exposed, but they also are now less secure because they know that the guarantee of their thrones by the Americans is no longer as secure as they thought it was. So glad tidings to those who put their trust in Allah and Allah alone, and follow the prophetic method to re-establish the Khilafah. We will remove the occupation of the Muslim world. We will remove the occupation of Palestine and Kashmir. And we will remove the despotic rulers, and we will, insha'Allah, establish the rule of Allah and bring back the promised Khilafah Rashida. So if you may have been misled by the lies and the propaganda of the puppet rulers or the Western powers, come to the promise of Allah and respond to that which gives you life. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.